Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Today is Wednesday, July 30th. You can see here my background music generator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is downloading a massive update or an update of some sort that is taking forever, so we won't be doing anything with that for a while. And hopefully that doesn't really affect any of my bandwidth. It probably shouldn't, but you never know. So instead, we'll do the normal thing of scrolling down the 24-hour peak concurrent player counts, which is this column. I should probably point out the column more often, and doing some warm-up for, I guess I should start promising about 45 minutes now, because that's about as long as it really is taking. And for today in particular, I don't know if I have really too much warm-up to really say. I finished, and I think I even said this in the previous stream, Puzzletronics Digital Edition, which is a tile swap puzzle game, which I may have very often referred to as a slide tile puzzle game, when actually the tiles don't slide. You just click on them and they swap to any position, which tile swap puzzles are way easier than tile slide puzzles. They remove a lot of recursion that it might be necessary, or pattern application just to solve things. It's the difference between peeling the stickers off a Rubik's Cube and actually solving a Rubik's Cube the proper way, with tile swap being the peeling the stickers off solution. So I finished Puzzletronics Digital Infinite and felt that that game was particularly terrible. Zero educational value, really, not really representing electronics to any good level, and really just kind of not good as a puzzle game and not good as an electronics game. So then I started playing Electronics Test Bench, I believe is the name of the game I'm playing now, which is much better. First of all, it has actual text in it and some educational value. And so for the first 10 or 20 puzzles out of probably about 100, I would say you have some pretty decent educational value. But then it becomes a game after that. You get a lot of circuit designs with a lot of switches that don't make any sense at all. There's just no reason anybody would make a device like the way they're designed. Even for educational purposes, it's not particularly well designed, in that there is just a lot of redundancy and ridiculousness. But there's a big difference between the two games. When I get to a puzzle in Electronics Test Bench, I actually have to think. I actually have to trace the paths. I actually have to solve the puzzle. Whereas I surprise myself in Puzzletronics very often by just swapping something around and then automatically winning. You actually do have to flip switches in every single puzzle, multiple switches. It isn't set up in some way where it could be by default already in the right sequence, where Puzzletronics, it almost always was in that scenario where, depending on how you did things, it was in the right sequence to begin with. There are some flaws, but there is also a caveat of text at the bottom of Electronics Test Lab. I think it's Test Lab. It might be Test Bench. That they say, hey, this is a game that is inspired by electronics but doesn't work exactly like electronics. And that is true, because you'll have things like inverter NOT gates on the circuit, and there will be two inputs and one output. Well, actually there'll be one input and one output on an inverter NOT gate, and it will just magically create electricity out of nowhere, which violates all rules as we know it as far as how the universe works. But yeah, a real NOT gate chip would have pins for VCC, voltage, common carrier or common core, whatever VCC actually stands for, and it would have a pin for ground. So a real IC, if you were going to get exactly one inverter, which you probably wouldn't ever do this, or it'd probably be very expensive to do it that way, there would be 4 pins, not 2, because the first pin would be VCC, and directly diagonal to that, more than likely, would be a ground connection, and then the second pin would be your input, and the third pin on the other side, 2 pins on each side, would be your output. And that's the only way that if no signal is coming in on the input, no voltage was coming in on the input, voltage would come out on the output. But the game completely ignores that. It also, halfway through the game, introduces capacitors, which fill up probably a lot faster than they would or should. Like, you could go either way with them. You could have them fill up slower so people could follow along, because real circuit simulators often do have the ability to slow down what's going on, or have them fill up even faster than they do. And then on the sides of the capacitors, they have a unrealistic charge indicator that has bars, and the bars go down as the capacitor drains. So that's not really realistic as far as how the capacitor looks. Some of how things are designed are also a little weird too, because the capacitors are lying on their side like they were a surface mount device. If you had a surface mount capacitor, it would probably be a black square like every other surface mount component looks like, not a round yellow cylinder, which most capacitors are going to be not surface mount but through hole cylinders that stand up vertically, don't lie down horizontally. Also, the circuit has what looks like a 9-volt connector on it that for some weird way is putting the positive power upward in this connector and then the negative downward, but then the battery itself has a positive and negative on the left and right of the top half, and the negative is just being connected to effectively a ground plane that is never explained or shown. So there would be, if you literally took the way the circuits are displayed in electronics test bench, no connection, and it would just be an open circuit always. So you just have to assume that on the other side of the board that you never see is a ground plane, or in the middle of the board, more likely, there's a ground plane. They tend to like to put the ground planes in the middle. I think putting the ground planes in the middle of a multi-layer circuit board helps them reduce interference, radio interference. Which that's another thing on the boards, is a lot of times things on the circuit paths and traces are just really twisty, when you could certainly line up the circuit traces and make them straighter and smoother and easier to follow if you weren't making it a video game. Because it looks like a 9-volt and you're dealing with red LEDs a lot, theoretically even the very first puzzle should just have the LED burn out. Because 9 volts going over a red LED is too many volts, and they never introduce resistors to do any kind of voltage drop. Their electronics test bench is very much just focusing more on digital things. And so in my first example with the inverter too, it's also worth pointing out that realistically you wouldn't have a surface mount NOT chip. More than likely what you would have is you would have almost nothing connecting to an Arduino chip or an ESP32 chip, and then all of that code would be done in software that way, instead of having a custom circuit board designed, and then all the transistors would be just built into the Arduino chip. But if you were going the older fashion way of doing things would have, how you would have done it maybe in the 70s and 80s, you would get an 8-pin chip where there would be 4 pins on one side, 4 pins on the other side, or a 16-pin chip, some longer rectangular chip. And what would happen there is that there would be 4 inverters in that chip. And so pin 1 would still be your common voltage in, and pin 8 in an 8-pin chip would be your ground. They do them diagonally, so if you put the chips in backwards, it won't immediately break your chip completely, or it shouldn't at least. And then pin 2 would be like the input of the first inverter, and then pin 3 would be the input of the second inverter, and then pin 4 would be the input of your third inverter. So in an 8-pin chip, you would have 3 inverters in that one chip, ready to go. Which, yeah, even that is fairly unlikely as to how you would build a circuit board. And what you're accomplishing with those kinds of designs outside of a puzzle is going to be extremely boring and minimal. Sadly, it really is the case because there's not much of a career unless you're working for a TV station or a radio station. There's not much of a career in repairing electronics. Everything is too small, and like repairing a cell phone is mostly just replacing the entirety of one of the motherboards or daughter boards in a cell phone. It's not going to be a lot of trying to find one broken resistor or something like that, which the game also never has you actually use a multimeter or any kind of device you might use to trace how things are going. You have to mentalize and just think about how all the circuits work, which is not realistic. The worst part, though, and I'm saying the worst part, but really I do kind of like Electronics Puzzle Bench for what it is. It is a game that probably hurts a little bit for me playing it in a rushed way, and if I just took on like one puzzle a day, it might be better. It definitely invokes the idea that it might be nice if there was a procedural generation function where you could just have an infinite number of puzzles. It's not going to have that, obviously. I don't think it is, at least. But yeah, the worst part about it is it has a terrible score system just to make it feel like a game, where to get the highest marks you have to solve every puzzle in under 10 seconds. And there are many times where you're switching 5, 6, 7 buttons and switches. So it is questionable, even if you could memorize the exact order and all the buttons that need to be switched, that you would be able to do the later puzzles that are much bigger under 10 seconds. Yeah. And it's frankly just incredibly arbitrary. It also encourages something very bad when dealing with electronics, which is trying to rush, which you should not do. You should take your time and be incredibly safe and cautious and precautious when dealing with electronics. Yeah. Haste makes waste is not even probably a strong enough phrase to use. You rush something and you may very well die by not waiting for a capacitor to discharge completely, or not de-energizing the circuit, or putting things together the wrong way and then having it put together. But yeah, I am overall thinking though that the electronics test bench or test lab, whatever the game is. We'll see the name here in a second or two, in a few minutes. I do find it much more educational. It's a game I can actually recommend to kids to learn electronics, to then get the basic ideas of how electronics and binary logic works on an electronical level, to then forget that completely as they move into computer programming, where computer programming and mathematics, which most kids are going to go into mathematics at the very least, but a lot of them are going to go into computer programming, depict the same kinds of binary logic, which are like directly related. A AND gate in transistor form in the real world is the same thing that's being used when you have an AND statement in computer code. But yeah, there's a completely different way in which it's depicted when programming in many different ways depending on the computer language. And mathematics and computer languages also don't agree with each other, so a AND gate in mathematics would be depicted using a lot of Latin symbols and be very old-fashioned in the way it depicts things. So yeah, there really needs for there to be a merger on how all three of those things are depicted and how all three of those things are communicated. But yeah, whereas the Puzzletronics games, either the Analog Infinite, which I felt was much better than the Digital Infinite version of Puzzletronics, those two games I can only really suggest to a pre-kindergartner playing on their iPad, just to get kind of used to the objects and recognize them. Well, Electronics Puzzle Labs, I think, is fair enough educational to be taught to a middle schooler, or maybe a freshman high schooler. But you would be cautious to suggest it to anybody past that point, or anybody that's actually taking an electronics class where electronics would be taught a lot better. And you would be very cautious to have Electronics Puzzle Lab be a software that kids could play for extra credit or for extra education if they're taking an electronics class. It definitely is not a real circuit simulator by any means. But yeah, it pretty much becomes a game, and it's a fine game, but it's not a great game per se. It's not like every single level is genius, and I would say it would probably help if there was a little bit more story and a little bit more polish overall throughout the entirety of the experience. Weirdly, Electronics Puzzle Lab is one of the newer games. It only came out in 2024. Let's look at the mobile revenue data. Now, I probably did a little bit of other things. I've been completely ghosted by the plumber at this point, I would have assumed. I had ordered MREs and they got lost in the mail, and apparently a new shipment has been sent and is going to arrive, I believe, tomorrow. So that's nice. And who knows, maybe the lost in the mail one will show up months later. If they're MREs and they're not damaged in shipping, then I would suspect I might get a whole second batch, which is actually going to be too much for me, frankly. I'd already been anticipating that I might package these MREs and just shove them under my bed instead of trying to keep them in a pantry. But yeah, having 4 big boxes, it's basically 80 pounds of MREs, if 4 boxes is, if one is to believe what the UPS weight mentions. Which definitely also begs the question, how does one lose 40 pounds of boxes. Pokemon TCG Pocket has its new expansion out, and more excitingly, they have updated their trading requirements, getting rid of the trade token currency, which Pokemon TCG Pocket still has too many different currencies, but at least now you are just using the shine dust to make trades, which I have a severely large amount of shine dust because shine dust adds just pointless visual effects to cards, and I don't want pointless visual effects to cards I already own. I want cards that I don't own, and I think I am not unique in that. I'm still playing Memento Mori. There's nothing special, I think, particularly going on right now. The new girl might be added pretty soon, as it's fairly consistent there. And I'm still playing Magical Modica, and there's really nothing there going on. And see, it's only right about now that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has finally downloaded everything with this new update. All that download and seemingly nothing changed. At least at the very launch, nothing changed. See, it's been approaching 3 years, I think, now for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and they really have just done a kind of terrible job overall. Just wanted to make sure this was still in full screen mode, because I tried to put it in window mode and it didn't work apparently. But yeah, really haven't overall done anything amazingly good with their designs, I would say. Probably should stop playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, if anything, and start to think about stop playing Memento Mori. I mean, not Memento Mori, but Magica Modica. Get whatever story I can get out of Magical Modica and then just be done with it. Which is weird to kind of say that for Magica Modica, because the game itself is fairly easy to stay on top of and be a top tier player just because I entered it day one. We still have a day or two until we get the refresh on the mobile revenue and the Steam hardware survey, and so we'll see how terribly far down the whole scenario is for Magica Modica. It fell 37 spots yesterday, and I mean last month, and it's probably going to fall even further. It may fall all the way out of the top 100 for sales numbers, but it might also go up a little bit because of it coming out on Steam. But I don't know if the mobile revenue chart we have I don't know if the revenue numbers there include Steam sales. I'm still playing a lot of Cracking the Cryptic on YouTube, solving Sudokus. Had a little bit more success lately in the past couple days too. I had one that I actually succeeded in almost completely on my own, if not completely on my own. And I am getting better about just drawing lines on the ones that are way too difficult. Typically, if I see the experts on Cracking the Cryptic taking an hour to solve it, then I know it's going to be too tough for me, and I just want to kind of listen to them solve it and see what I can absorb through osmosis as far as what is going on, and what is the secret to that specific Sudoku variant. Whereas in the past I might have stuck around with it and tried it for an hour. But yeah, I don't know if I'm accomplishing too much otherwise. Still trying to find little projects, just do one thing here, one thing there. Still trying to program my smart house to work exactly how I want it, making tweaks here and there. It's a real distraction. Speaking of real distractions, I mentioned how I had this whim to make my own personal food pyramid, which I would call a food iceberg chart, and I played around with that a little bit, even though I said specifically I shouldn't in no way play around with that or even try, because that's not going to go anywhere, but I still did. And in the end, playing around with it really did teach me some functions, as far as there are default conversions for a lot of things inside of Google Sheets. So I found ways to make a chart that would convert like teaspoons to tablespoons to ounces to quarts to pints, things like that. As far as conversions, that chart should just be the kind of additional information that is on a food iceberg, in that if it has to do with food, having a chart that has everything you need to know in one place would be very helpful, instead of potentially there being several charts or several announcements that people could miss. One of the things I was thinking there too is that the food pyramid, however it's made, should really be broken up into, I think, at least 5 different categories. The categories as far as what kind of calories you should be eating should probably fall under kids, and I don't know if there really is a need to genderize kids. If anything, it might do more harm than good to say little boys or little girls should eat differently, which arguably, if anything, you might want to lie a little bit there and tell little girls to eat more than little boys, just to balance it out evenly. But for the most part, I would say little girls probably should be eating a little bit more than little boys are, but I don't have any health reasons to explain why I would guess that's the case. So yeah, on my first thought, there should be a kids category, then there should be an adults category. Again, I don't see if there really should be a gendering there of more male or female in that point. But then the next category is very much going to need to be gendered, in that there should be a pregnant category, because a pregnant person, and if we'll be a little woke and just call them pregnant persons, if there is a pregnant person, they should probably be eating a lot more calories. They're eating for 2 effectively, but also you probably shouldn't just be encouraging completely uncontrolled eating of anything whatsoever. Specifically, a good example of that is fish, which has a high amount of mercury in it. So you shouldn't be eating 3-4 portions of fish, particularly when you're pregnant. But in reality, you should probably only be eating 1 portion of fish. And that's not even begin to think about microplastics, where, yeah, there's an argument to perhaps stop eating a lot of different things if we're going to try and reduce microplastics. So yeah, kids, adults, pregnant, and then elderly would be a fourth category, which, yeah, there is probably an argument for elderly to eat more, but maybe not. Maybe they will tend to naturally eat less anyways. And so a food pyramid would probably be best designed to say this is what a healthy person in that situation should be. And yeah, I don't think a fifth category should be 6, so I don't know where I got a fifth category there. That's only 4 categories. I guess I was thinking that maybe men and women adults should be split up, and there is an argument for that. So, but yeah, at the very least, kids, adults, pregnant, elderly. 4 categories for 4 different ranges of what people should eat. And definitely there probably needs to be some color coding there in that certain foods should be encouraged more or less depending on whether they're elderly or a kid or an adult or pregnant. Definitely, I think in my food iceberg too, I think there's real room to get away from individual meals and individual portions of meals and think of it as more of a daily consumption goal, and that way it doesn't make it more complicated, and it probably should be more of a range where if you're eating 0% protein in a day, that's too little. If you're eating 10 grams of protein, that's probably too little. And if you're eating like 100 ounces of protein, that's probably too much. Yeah. So there really should just be a high and a low that you stay within, and within that high and low there should be the average line, and then there should be perhaps a diagonal dieting line or bulking line to say, hey, you also shouldn't be eating more than 20% of the average amount of any food, even if you are bulking up, because that's gaining weight too fast. Yeah. And yeah, now that I think about it, also there probably should be some food allergies just hinted at and color coded also in that way. So yeah, even though I said I shouldn't put any thought into it, and it still is the thought that's in my brain, and creativity comes whether you want it or not, to a certain extent, and thoughts come to me whether I want it or not. Yeah. So yeah, I've had more thoughts than actual implementations on that chart, and that chart would go absolutely nowhere, and I should instead be boxing up all my Legos. Lego is doing an interesting thing, come to think of it as I ramble here, in that if you have unconnected Legos gently used, they will give you like a $4, I probably store credit for a pound of Legos, which is a lot of Legos really, and I can't help but wonder if that is $4 but you have to ship it to them at your own expense. So yeah, it's questionable whether that would ever be a good deal. More than likely, if you individually pieced out and sold, Lego pieces, you would get more than $4 selling a pound of any random Lego pieces. And I can only assume Legos is literally just, I mean, Lego is just buying back this as a gimmick and then melting down the plastic to recycle it. Which, in fairness, I guess that might be perhaps one of the best ways to recycle plastic is to have Lego pieces melted down to make new Lego pieces instead of having different types of plastic from other things melted down to try and make something new. The mixing of the many different types of plastics makes it more difficult to recycle. But yeah, it's not really a deal I think I would encourage too many people to engage with, unless, but then I could see a lot of parents that have just a whole bunch of unconnected Lego pieces that they might want to get rid of, and frankly you might get more doing it that way than you would selling it at a garage sale. But then the other thought is, why not just give away Legos to somebody? You're always going to find somebody that wouldn't mind some extra Lego pieces. But anyway, it's to back up one layer of this diatribe. I should be boxing up my Legos and cleaning and decluttering my house more than I am, but yeah, I'm not getting around to it very often. Some of that has to do with the times I'm awake. A lot of it has to do with the dog days of summer, and a lot of it has to do with just being tired. But yeah, I am struggling to motivate myself. And why does this look this way? Looks like Google Documents has decided to change the way it looks. And so my chart now looks pretty terrible. Feel like I'm missing one of my extensions. But no, it's not that uBlock origin is off. What might have happened here is, as I was trying to randomly press buttons to remember how to move Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel to my next monitor, I hit a button and it caused everything to reset. And so that might be what has occurred there as an issue. Well, this chart doesn't matter that much, so let's just move on anyways. So yeah, it is left shift the Windows button, probably the Windows left Windows button, and then the arrow key left and or right, not and or right. So that's how you move a window from one to the other, but I always forget it because I use it infrequently enough. So yeah, here we have the Electronic Puzzle Lab, and we will click on the achievements. It is Electronics Puzzle Lab is the name of the game, and we'll look at what achievements we've gotten to and which ones other people have gotten to. Decent number of people have made it as far as I've made it, which is to the display 7 segment displays LCD displays, 15%. But for a game that's supposed to be a little bit educational, 15% is a little low. And the only two remaining achievements are just XOR gates and XNOR gates, which is great news for me because that means I will get 100% of all of these achievements, which means the internal beat every level under 10 seconds is just pointless, in that it doesn't do anything at all as far as achievements are concerned. Another thing that's a problem is that the boards don't really zoom in, so you have a lot of things on the sides of this anti-static mat and you never use any of those things. They're just an image there, and you are only interacting with the circuit board, this side of the circuit board. But there's a lot of times where the circuit board could be stretched and skewed just a little bit to take up more of the screen. There is a press Z to zoom in function. It zooms in a tiny amount and is not very helpful. It also doesn't remember if you are zoomed in, so you have to zoom in every single puzzle. Also, every single puzzle starts with you here and does a little animation for you to sit down and actually get to this screen where you can actually interact with things, which also takes probably a second of your 10 seconds to beat a level. This is a pretty good example of the silliness that you get with the circuit boards, and that there's just a ton of different switches you can switch, and eventually they give you the ability to cut wires too, and then they introduce the blue LED to represent a circuit that must not be charged, where that really should probably be a fuse or a circuit breaker or something to say, hey, if electricity goes this way, something bad is going on. But yeah, there is weirdness even with that, is when they first introduced the blue LEDs, which by the way, blue LEDs use less voltage than red LEDs, and there's no circuitry in this at all to account for that. At the very beginning they introduced the blue LEDs, and nothing happens when you turn on a blue LED. You can just continue to flip switches until you get it to the right orientation. Then they eventually introduce you get a full game over state and have to reset, which just is really inconsistent. But yeah, overall I am fairly happy with it, and the audience is fairly happy with it. I just wish that there was more competition and more polish on these kinds of things, these kinds of games, which, yeah, when we look at the more like this and the way the algorithm works on Steam, it is very much the case that it is just looking at tags and taking a while to load there, and the tag system is just not getting a deep enough level of metrics to highlight things that are actually close to it. So you're getting a lot of power wash simulators and house flippers and things like that, plus demos and new releases and things that get further and further away. And when, yeah, you're comparing Riven, the Riven remake from 2024 to it, you're very, very far away from where people would want to be. PC Building Simulator is perhaps the closest one, and even that's not particularly close. But yeah, Electronics Puzzle Labs is the game I've been playing recently after playing Puzzletronics Digital Infinite, and then I launched Analog Infinite, Analog Logic, to just compare to see which one was better, and the analog is better. Hairdressing simulator here is mixed, unfortunately, because I could see how that might be just unique enough to catch people's attention. And again, it's taking forever to load. There was a TV show that was a lot like Bar Rescue, where it was someone rescuing hair salons, and yeah, it definitely seems like a hair salon is the kind of thing that could be a really cheap, small business, but it probably is very much tight on the margins as far as what it does, and that you have to have a consistent audience of people who want to pay extra to get their hair styled or cut. And these are hair salons basically for women, not men's hair salons where you're just going to get a military buzz cut, and frankly all of those should have gone out of business by now. But yeah, there's a lot of weirdness certainly in that hair salons are kind of scammy, and they've become McDonaldized with franchises like Great Clips and things like that. But there's a whole scamminess there in that you're basically earning and paying a lot for a hair cutting license, when having a license seems kind of arbitrary that you would need to have a license, but it's probably not a bad idea. And then you're renting out the chair, so each person who is actually cutting people's hairs, each stylist, is renting out the chair and the square footage in a hair salon from some owner, and then the owner is taking a cut of the profits from that, while really just paying rent on the building and maintaining it to a certain level, maintaining product and selling shampoos and things like that, which there's more profit I think in selling product than there is actually doing the haircuts, which inherently that is what the stylists are also turned into, is people doing sales pitches selling different products. It also severely depends on the area you live in. If you are in a very poor neighborhood doing haircuts, you're looking at $10 a haircut. If you're in a super rich neighborhood, $40, $50, $100 haircuts are on the table, which the clients you get and keep will drastically change how profitable one hairstylist can be. There is also, I think, some real personality issues that can show up in hairstylists, and that they can perhaps just not be as professional as they need to be, and or the exact same could be claimed sometimes showing up for the owners of hairdressing salons. I'm a little surprised nobody has ever tried to take the product of a hair salon and expanded upon it to also be like a Starbucks. Like, yeah, maybe there's a slight problem of giving coffee to people while they're getting their hair cut that they'd run off to the bathroom or spill on themselves, but yeah, I can see a Starbucks type merger there, so you have two different markets, people sometimes coming in for just a cup of coffee and then deciding to get a haircut, people coming in for a haircut and getting more of a spa treatment. I could see also selling wine, which would require more alcohol license and food licenses, but yeah, I could also see selling cookies and bakeries and things like that. There is definitely some overlap of, hey, I'm gonna go pamper myself, let's go to this place that does all of that. But then there might also just be a weirdness around a hair salon being covered in hair and food also being served in the same building. Anyways, I've talked way too much about that. We were talking about electronic simulators. Okay, so electrician simulator here is not electronics, and it is much more the residential wiring of things, it seems. Although it does also seem to show in some of these screenshots that you are also repairing some electronic things. Which residential wiring is, this is a demo for the first game, which apparently, yeah, I think this is, they say there's a VR version of this too, but yeah, I think this is a demo. So first of all, you can tell that this is European style wiring that's going on here, and you're kind of magically doing wiring through the walls after they've been plastered. And so here's repairing devices, which that is intriguing to me, certainly, as far as just how many different devices could you show and actually repair, because that's all going to be bespoke, handcrafted stuff. But yeah, you're not super likely to be good at residential wiring and good at repairing electronics. One is a very large scale and things are just done very differently, and you have to focus on building code a lot more in residential wiring, whereas repairing a gamepad on a controller is something an electrician would not do, an appliance repair person would do, if such a thing existed. Is this a demo or is this not a demo? Yeah, it's a demo. Or shock is. So you can see how the recommendation algorithm also still just has this problem in that it suggested to me a demo, new smart DLC, smart devices. So yeah, this is another one to consider, and this came out in 2022, where the game I'm playing came out in 2024, so this is more impressive already just by the screenshots. Now the question is really, how does it really play? Now PC Maker, though, is going to be a completely different experience. It isn't even out yet, so I'm going to put that on the follow list, if it will go on the follow list, and make a YouTube short on it. Then It Works Electronics Repair Simulator looks even nicer as far as the visuals go. So yeah, there's a whole series of these that are just coming into their point. And I think a lot of this is because of just increased interest in making things and being a maker. I think a lot of this also might be getting spurred on due to people having more free time during COVID and having less money these days, and starting to think about how do I make things last or repair things. We may very well, through sheer economic downfall finally have hit a point where people are going to start trying to hold on to things instead of just throwing things away and replacing them. This is effectively an Arduino circuit board. I've seen this. The red would either be a special edition of the Arduino or it would be a knockoff Arduino, which in reality, if there was anything broken in an Arduino, you would spend another $10 just to get a new one. And if you were using a multimeter to read the voltages out from the programmed pins, the general purpose input output pins of an Arduino, you would be sticking them down these connector holes, not reading it from a surface mount component. Yep. And then I guess that brings us to Steam's front page, which there's a Steam Racing Fest going on. We'll look at that. And then I don't think there's probably going to be too much that interests me on the front page today. We should just hurry up. I said it was going to take me 40 minutes to warm up, and then I started rambling about several different things where my mind is just all over the place. Part of this is because I am not sleeping long enough, well enough. I saw somebody review Tales of the Shire and gave it a pretty bad review, but it does seem to me where the reviews from Steam players, it seems to be better. Let's check out this game. The name is funny, Pip My Dice instead of Pimp My Ride or Pimp My Dice. Pip being the dots on dices. Steam Deck's still selling well, despite there being a decent push for it to start to fall down, as there might be a new Steam Deck in development. DF Retro was speculating that the low power mode for the PS5 that was just announced might be an indicator that it is Sony's way of letting people program for low power mode, so that Sony comes out with some kind of handheld that would only work up until that low power mode. And so you could develop a game on a PS5 now in low power mode and have the same performance, or expect the same performance, on some future Sony handheld. Which, yeah, that is fairly believable, really. It makes a lot of sense that Sony should have had a true proper handheld out years ago to compete with the Switch 1, and they have just, if they just now are starting to actually finalize those efforts, they are really going to be far behind. But yeah, I don't know what specifically a PlayStation handheld is going to offer these days. Anyways. Right. So yeah, Pip My Dice is a dice game. Apparently I've already seen it, but I don't remember it for sure. Tales of the Shire is 75% positive at the moment, but yeah, review I saw said that it is kind of minimal on what you can actually do, that you have to grow crops and you just have to wait to grow crops, and you can't sleep to make the day go forward until your character is tired. And so the review seemed to imply that there was just nothing to do at certain points, and that you just have to wait until actual real time passes before the crops grow. Once the crops grow, you can cook food, and then you cook food to then have dinner parties to increase your relationships. But yeah, the whole cycle there seems to be very slow, according to that review. But I also have to point out that the majority of the 665 people who reviewed here are disagreeing with that review, so maybe they are seeing something that the one YouTuber I saw did not see. As far as Steam Racing Fest goes, yeah, I think I'd be hard pressed to really want to buy any racing game at the moment. I don't play racing games that often, and I don't think I need any racing games for any other reason. Yeah. If I was going to get anything, it'd probably be the Hot Wheels game. But the big issue here, notice there is no Steam Deck category for the sale, is going to be upcoming games, because that's where racing comes from. Notice that there's some speedrunning games getting thrown in as racing games. But yes, Garfield Kart 2 is one I've got my eye on, coming out in September 10th, and I believe Sonic is also coming out eventually, and that's one I've got my eye on too. It's funny, you click upcoming here and then you have to click upcoming here, and it sucks that it's taking so long. But yeah. And I think there might be another kid-friendly game that I'm also keeping an eye on too. It's not showing it. There's the Garfield Kart 2, there's the Sonic game, and there might be another. But it must not have a Steam page at the moment. So in the last stream, I said we didn't have any of the Video Games Chronicle articles open. Weirdly today, I seem to have found all of those articles. They seem to have opened in just a completely different spot, and I just didn't see them, which that is weird, to say the least. Go ahead and grab these point shot things. Not for any real reason, just to own them. Steam Deck refurbs have changed. Page has refreshed. Interesting. Speaking of Valve somewhat, Gabe Newell gave an interview to somebody who is doing a project and has a very small YouTube thing. I'm not sure that there was really anything that Gabe Newell really said. Again, he looks healthier than he has looked in the past, but he is old, and so maybe he looks a little bit older and a little less healthy. And I think he is probably fairly close to retiring. It is a certainly interesting question as far as does he want to retire before or after they finally release something called Half-Life 3. I think him retiring and then them quickly churning out something called Half-Life 3 might work better. But yeah, he is not really talking on those terms that he ever actually would retire. But I don't think he is actually doing too much day-to-day with Steam or Valve or anything, and he is really mostly just a figurehead. He is perhaps in the same situation as Bill Gates is in. But yeah, they could have certainly, they could be holding his retirement as an announcement for a major distraction, which they've tried to do a few things to distract people from the whole censorship because of payment processors scenario. And I've seen a few more YouTube video game critics and just YouTube people in general talking about the censorship thing. And I haven't seen anybody that agrees with what PayPal and Stripe and MasterCard and Visa have been doing. So hopefully those credit card payment processors get enough backlash that they stop pushing this censorship. But even if they stopped now, I don't think they would reverse course. Which, yeah, unfortunately, I don't know what could happen to undo the censorship and undo the damage that has been done already. Are these prices any different for the LCD version? It might be. The prices might be maybe a little bit cheaper. I don't think so, though. They may very well be that they've been on sale, these prices, before, but I'm not even sure there's ever been a sale for the refurbs. But we do see price tags, but they are still out of stock. Yeah. And so we have to leave it at that. Yeah, as we get closer and closer to Black Friday, the odds of them announcing any new Steam Deck goes down. And then I would say it's practically zero chance that they would announce a new Steam Deck on Black Friday or after Black Friday during a Steam Winter Sale, which tends to happen after Black Friday. But yeah, maybe they would announce a new Steam Deck, but then not have it available by Christmas, and that would be a very weird announcement to make. You can see Tales of the Shire is being played a lot on the Steam Deck. With its style of visuals, it probably is the great kind of game to play there on the Steam Deck. Is this just a clock? No, it is not. Yeah. I guess that is something to also be pointed out on the Steam Deck Top 100 played chart here, is that we have never seen some of the more generic garbage games listed as being played. There's not people just running soundboard or what is it, desktop something, or banana something. That you have not seen any kind of unlock trading card games or achievement games, things that aren't really games, being shown up on this list. And also not really seeing a lot of Valve games like Counter-Strike, yeah, showing up either on the list, which does definitely present that there might be a different audience. Alright, so I have just realized everything is out of order because we have the interstitial here of Video Games Chronicles, Gematsu, Gaming on Linux, GameDeveloper.com, all the games on Steam, Flawless Cleanup, and that, and all of that is out of order. Wait, what the heck happened? I'm in a completely different window. I've been in a completely different window since PC Maker. Well, it's an hour and 10 minutes, and for some reason, things just opened twice. So we're basically starting over again. Here's the 24-hour peak concurrent, and we can point out games that aren't on the Steam Deck. Counter-Strike 2, Banana, Wallpaper Engine, Marvel Rivals, Rust, Bongo Cat. Some of those games are very consistently in the top 1 games, and a lot of these games are not really games, or not things that I'm very happy to see in the top 100 list. Because, yeah, OBS Studio is probably the best example of something that's actually software, not a game. And SoundPad is another example of software, not a game. Alright, well. I think my gestures are taking forever, so I'm just gonna click these. Yeah, there was this weirdness that we have a Gaming on Linux article to grab the Sniper Elite Classics collection in this new Humble Bundle, which I think we had already even talked about that article, and it is just in the way. Yeah. So yeah, I'm confused, to say the least. So now we're at the interstitial for Video Game Chronicles, and I am seeing that there aren't any Video Games Chronicle articles where they should be, which I think means things are just all over the place, which would mean that the Video Games Chronicle articles I saw earlier aren't ones from a week before. They are ones from today. So I'm going to have to jump around a lot, I think. So they have a first play of Air Combat 22 from Video Games Chronicles. I have no interest in going any further on that, and don't want to cover them doing quick looks of first plays. The Nintendo Direct is a partner showcase coming tomorrow. Broadcasts will focus mainly on third-party Switch and Switch 2 games, which this may be very much the first chance for the Switch 2 to have third-party developers show off their games. It almost feels like they very arbitrarily launched the Switch 2 with the Mario Kart World, and then delayed any showcases or announcements or releases of anything until after Donkey Kong Bonanza. Which, yes, I haven't heard a lot of people say anything about Donkey Kong Bonanza, but of what I have heard, people seem to be loving it. Let's see. Pokemon TCG Mega Evolution, this is the real-world Pokemon card game, is going to debut Mega Ultra Rare Gold cards, next Pokemon trading card games that will be released in September. Is there actual gold on them? Or is this just a case of them trying to make things look like they're more valuable than they really are? Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to scroll down here and see if they say there's actual gold on them. I mean, if it was real gold foil, which it might be, you probably are talking $1 or $2 of gold anyways, but that would still make a card very expensive in its production costs. And yeah, the fact that these have like 340 health, I think that's their HP is 340, 360, shows that Pokemon has had a real creep upward in how much life the characters have at the top level, at least. Monster Hunter Wilds extra in-game content is planned for September. It's being brought forward. Some of the upcoming Title Update 3 content will instead be part of the mid-August update. This is perhaps the best evidence so far that they're rushing to be done with Monster Hunter Wild to just abandon it as a game. Or it is also possible they're trying to rush forward new content to make people actually happy with Monster Hunter Wild, which is a tall order. Elden Ring's 2-player mode patch has been delayed due to a tsunami warnings. Tsunami warnings have rocked the Pacific following an 8.8 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Russia. 8.8 is quite a lot of a earthquake, and it is assumedly going to do some level of high tides, probably flooding damage to Hawaii, most of the west coast of the United States, and the northern parts of Japan, and I'm sure a lot of the coastline of China too. I wouldn't be surprised if there's higher tides in tsunamis, even reaching Australia and some of the Korean and southern Asian countries. Which, yeah, humans don't inherently have to cause their own demise. There's always the possibility that the earth itself will cause its own demise. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if there is some scientific reason that we have caused global climate change and that has caused the 8.8 magnitude earthquake to happen. I doubt it, though. I doubt that's the case. Certainly, though, melting ice caps probably have raised water levels everywhere, which makes it a worse scenario for tsunamis. Let's see. The Pokemon Company has removed 2 TCG Pocket card designs and deeply apologizes following claims of plagiarism. A Chinese fan artist noticed that their Ho-Oh art looked similar to that in a new card design in the mobile game. Interesting, because now we've got different art for cards specifically in the mobile game, which is potentially being done in a plagiaristic fashion. But in fairness, I would also say that the possibility of similarities are fairly high, and fan art is already plagiarizing the art designs of the Pokemon Company, so they might very well be within their own realm to say, hey, you made derivative art of our art. Don't be surprised if our official art looks something like that. Yeah. I guess that's what that was showing, is that new art was coming soon. Inherently, though, the immersive art cards are just 2 special arts that TCG Pocket made for the expansion, which is to say there are only probably 2 special art cards, where This art card here is just a scan of what is actually in the real world card game. So them potentially admitting plagiarism here on the two on a basically 100% of what the work they did is a problem. Yeah, I'm having a hard time getting a good visual comparison to see how much the plagiarism goes, because I definitely could lean towards it and say, alright, well, it looks similar, but is it that similar? And I don't think they are presenting their evidence particularly well here. Yeah, you have, I assume this is fan art, which is showing Ho-Oh, and then you have half of a card showing him in just about the same angle, but this card has also been mirrored and is backwards to match that angle. In the actual design, it's facing the other direction. Not that that changes too much. I would say that there's definitely been some tracing and referencing here. That claws look to be about in the same position. The wingspan and curve looks to be about the same position. The curve of the neck looks to be just about the same. I wouldn't say it's 100% the same. This head is tilted more upward, where this head is more downward, where you can better see the eyes. But it definitely feels like there is some level of referencing going on there, if not direct tracing. Yeah. So yeah, it's really more of a case of it doesn't matter if you actually are guilty of plagiarism. If you are guilty, if people feel like you're guilty of plagiarism, and in that case, I think people would say they feel it feels like they are guilty of plagiarism. And see, that's another nail in the coffin for Pokemon TCG Pocket as a game that is really all about doing the bare minimum to try to get you to pay for microtransactions to open card packs for something that barely even encourages you to play the game. Notice we're talking about the new expansion for Pokemon TCG Pocket. There is really no focus or mention at all that they've added more single player content that you can do, or that a new season is about to start to play ranked play, or even that they upgraded the trade system to potentially make it a better trading event. I think perhaps in upgrading the trade system, they've also removed the limit that you have to have 2 copies, or actually you have to have 3 copies of a card before you can trade it. You can seemingly now trade your very last card for a different card if you want to. Moving on, Mario Kart World's latest update makes CPU components easier. The version 1.2.0 patch also tells players when they've collected everything in free roam mode, which you would think that would be something that would be there on day one. EA CEO says it's all in as a company on Battlefield 6, is building a platform rather than a product. Andrew Wilson says EA has been investing more behind this Battlefield than any other before it, which, I mean, that is kind of what you would expect a video game CEO to say, even if it isn't true. But you kind of hope it isn't true. But I mean, what do we really want to see with EA? We want to see EA be broken up as a monopoly and have several of the things and licenses it's sitting on be sold off in bankruptcy at auction. That's the level of hate that I think most gamers have for EA. That's what I would like to see happen with them, because there's zero expectation that EA would ever be good enough to revitalize, remaster, re-release the significant number of games they do own the rights to, and even if they did, they wouldn't have the focus on it, and they would just rather make sports games and Battlefield games full of microtransactions and just manipulative game mechanics like microtransactions and season passes and DLC. And I personally don't care about the Battlefield series, and I question who actually does these days. So them being all in behind it means basically nothing to me. It just maintains my still existing feelings for EA, that they are a company that is not offering a product that I am interested in while sitting on intellectual property that I would be interested in. I'll leave it at that. EA's CEO also says it's not looking to make any changes on pricing on games like Battlefield 6. Andrew Wilson says there's no dramatic changes planned yet, which, okay. Obviously there must have been a shareholder meeting or something. It was a earnings call following the publication of the Q1 results that he said those two things. Which that does go to point out something. It's surprising more mainstream video game journalists don't just have one share in video game companies so that they can sit in on earnings calls. In fact, they probably don't even have to invest in the company. They could probably just say, hey, I'm a journalist, I would like to sit in on this earnings call, and they would be allowed to do it in most cases. If not legally, they'd just be allowed for good PR reasons. But I mean, if you legally owned even one voting share of like preferred stock, then I think you legally have a right to sit in on an earnings call or go to a shareholders meeting or something like that. And that would just be a great way to get inside scoops and get bits of information. A lot of it would be very boring information, certainly, but it would still be a great way to get information. But it doesn't seem like too many people actually do that. And I wouldn't really encourage a small-time video game journalist to do that. You'd have to have a lot of free time and a lot of free money to buy shares and sit in on earnings calls if you have just a few thousand subscribers. Moving on, PlayStation Plus Essential monthly games for August includes Lies of P. 3 more games will be available for subscribers to claim. Daisy, and I can't even read that one. The International Game Developers Association is seriously alarmed by the recent adult game delistings. So we have our first lobbyist group coming out against these delistings. Obviously, game developers are not going to be happy around them not being able to sell products. Weirdly, though, I think the IGDA is more of a European focused organization, where the ESRB should also be coming out and making a statement. The IGDA is calling for greater transparency and fairness in how adult games are moderated and actioned. That's a funny little euphemism. So yeah, again, I have not heard a single person sing the praises of the payment processors kowtowing to Collective Shout, which is just a tiny activist organization that should not be really listened to. Moving on, Atari has agreed to acquire Thunderful for around 4.5 million euros. Atari will own around 82% of Thunderful shares, subject to shareholder approval next month. Remember, this is the new company that owns the right to the name Atari, not the original Atari. And this new company that owns the name Atari has not really done anything with Atari. Not anything great with it, at least. Yeah. Atari has acquired Digital Eclipse, Night Dive Studios, and Moby Games, the Moby Games database website. So it does seem like they are on an acquisition spree, trying to become a real video game company. But we'll have to wait and see if they actually succeed at that. Following the Suicide Squad's flop, Warner Brothers is hiring for another live service game. Warner has suffered a series of high-profile flops, all of which are being blamed on the person who I believe is still in charge of Warner Brothers games. But yeah, almost certainly they would still want to make some kind of live service product, and it's inherently not wrong to want to make a live service. You can't blame all of Suicide Squad's failure just on the fact that it was a live service game. You have to blame a significant amount of its failure on the fact that it was just not a good game. If it had been a good game, people would have sung its praises and played it and stuck with it. You also have to blame a lot of that on the fact that the Suicide Squad is just never really going to be that popular. So it was doomed for less success than it needed to begin with. Microsoft is rolling out Xbox age verification to comply with the UK's Online Safety Act. The age verification tool will be mandatory for some social features in 2026. YouTube is also rolling out what they are calling algorithmic age verification, where it determines somehow whether it thinks you're under 18 or 21, whatever the age limit requirement is in your region, and then forces you individually, if it thinks you're underage, to verify that you're not underage. And one of the things I think that's really happening there for YouTube is that I imagine it is just going to slowly, almost at random, age verify everybody it has to age verify, but by saying that it's based on your viewing habits or your activity in some way, it implies that they aren't just doing a default age verification for everybody in certain regions like the UK. And yeah, I think a lot of what it's doing is probably just saying, hey, if you had already been a good consumer and purchased something from YouTube, if you had a subscription for YouTube TV or something, or if you had purchased a movie or rented a movie, I don't even know if you can rent movies on YouTube, then they would have already had your age. And so if they already had your age, they don't need it again. But if you are just a freeloader watching ads, I bet you will probably get verified, and maybe they will do it in just phases. But yeah. It is also worth pointing out, with the major increase in VPN usage in the UK as soon as this act went into effect, now the UK, always being a fan of creating nanny states, is starting to discuss making VPNs illegal. So yeah, they are going to demonize VPNs and take away even more rights from the UK citizens if they can get away with it. And then some of these might be stories we talked about in the last stream because the macro didn't run in the last stream, so we might just go over them very lightly. Sony is suing Tencent, claiming that Lights of Motoram game is a slavish clone of Horizon series. Sony claims it's declined Tencent offer last year to collaborate on a Horizon game. And yeah, you see these two pictures together, they definitely look very similar. It's very hard to make an argument that it isn't a clone. The bigger argument is maybe clones should be allowed. And if we are going to compare the two, I like the visuals of Light of Motoram more. It's bright and colorful and just feels more anime-esque, whereas the colors of Horizon in this screenshot are dull and brown, and there's just a little bit more fog, and there's less being shown at all. We know Horizon games eventually just get to be even uglier in the sequel. Yeah. The question that would come up if this really went to a lawsuit, particularly, I'm not sure whether this is going to be a Japanese lawsuit or a Chinese lawsuit, because if it was a Chinese lawsuit, almost certainly the Chinese company would win, and the same might be true for a Japanese lawsuit. But yeah, that if it's a Japanese lawsuit, Sony almost certainly would win. But what would change the tide there, other than just nationalism, is there probably is prior art to the concept of robots and caveman or Native Americans. When you find that there is some kind of artist out there, even if it's just some deviant artist who made art decades ago where there was caveman characters next to robots, the originality claims of Horizon might start to fall apart fairly quickly. Like, they may have a very hard time pinpointing what is original enough to deserve a copyright for Horizon. And what was good about Horizon probably shouldn't be copyrighted, so more people can make clones of it, so we have better games. Like, inherently, that's the problem with copyright. If something is garbage, there's no reason to copyright it, and if something is good, it probably doesn't help society that it is copyrighted. Moving on, Mario Paint has been added to the Switch Online's Super NES library. It supports the Switch 2 mouse controls, which, yes, I definitely suspect that is the only reason the Switch 2 actually has mouse controls, is so that you can use it with Mario Paint, which is about the only game that ever did use the mouse. I think there's maybe some on-rail shooters that also use the mouse for the Super NES, but Mario Paint is really the only one people remember. Switch 1 owners can plug in a USB mouse, which this is the first I've ever heard of being able to plug in a USB mouse into a Switch 1, and I would question, does that mean you have to plug in a USB mouse to the dock and have it in docked mode? Or can you plug in a USB-C mouse plug if you have something with a USB-C connector on a wired mouse to the bottom of a Switch 1? Yeah, that is a question. And if you can plug in a mouse to the bottom of a Switch, will the mouse work in the menus, or does it only work in Mario Paint? Sony came out with its fight stick called the Flex Strike, We talked about this in the last stream. The only thing that I found interesting is that it has easily swappable restrictor gates on the bottom of it, changing the pattern from this analog stick from being potentially a pure circle on the edges to being a hexagon to being an 8-way stick instead of maybe a 16-way stick. I don't know if it has an actual 4-way restrictor, which that might be what you want more. And honestly, two 2-way restrictors that you could stack might be more what you want, because there's a few arcade games, but this is really for fighting games, that where the restrictors actually did only let you go left or right or up and down, and didn't have a 4-way restrictor of up, down, left, right. Although really just a 4-way restrictor would be the minimum of a restrictor you would want. It's going to come down to price, and it's going to come down to quality as far as what goes into these kinds of devices. As far as whether you would really want the Sony fight stick over a third-party fight stick. The creator of the original 1982 Football Manager is porting it to Steam. We talked about this in the last stream. Hollow Knight Silksong will be playable at Gamescom. Pokemon TCG community pillar Justin Basil died at age 36. We talked about that in the last stream. Puzzle and Dragon Studio considers a shareholder group request to vote to dismiss its presidents. Angry shareholders have previously called out the company for increasing the president's pay while profits plummeted. And then the showrunner who did some of Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica reboot, Ronald D. Moore, is now the showrunner for the Amazon Prime Video God of War show that is being in development. And then the creator of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, also the creator or director of the Callisto Protocol, is said that this might be, he's directed his last game and he may never direct another game. He said this, however, on a podcast with his daughter, who's also working on a game. So so yeah, he is very much trying to promote the daughter, which I don't know if really there's any reason to believe that there should be any kind of feudalism style of mentality around game developers, that the kid of a game developer is going to have the same skills or creativity as a parent might have. And frankly, I think most game development is way more collaborative than people want to admit, so I don't think that there's much to be believed that a kid of a game developer is going to do great things. If anything, I would expect that they are just going to be nepo babies, and nepotism may help them get a job, but it probably won't help them gain the right attitudes and gain the right creativity, or even have the right life experience to make something great. We certainly have seen in other industries that tends to be true, that pretty much there are no examples of kids of celebrities actually being great at being celebrities themselves. Perhaps Hannah Montana is maybe a bit of an exception there, and I guess there's a couple other examples. Actors often do have rich parent actors that then let them get more film roles, but I'm not sure if there's ever been a really great actor that then led to their kids being great actors themselves. But yeah, I just don't think nepotism in video games in particular is ever going to really become a thing, and we're not going to have dynasties of game developers, more than likely. And then a new Friday the 13th sequel game is in the works, although it's not clear whether it's a direct follow-up to the 2017 Friday the 13th game. I would kind of have to assume that is the case. Now, here's where we're going to get into some weirdness, because I've got to scroll around here to figure out where the Gematsu articles are and where the new games on Steam are. Now to go through that news, and I think I found it. So here's the Gematsu articles. Shantae Advanced Risky Revolution launches August 19th. The deluxe edition includes 3 new costumes, and it feels like you get at least different visuals in your attacks with these 3 different costumes. Risky Revolution is a port re-release of a game that already exists, but it existed, I think, for the Nintendo DS. So by default she's running around in her genie outfit, and so this is the Relic Hunter outfit, and those spiky balls look different, I think, when you're not wearing that outfit. This is the high voltage outfit, where that lightning cloud probably looks different. And then here you have the very scantily clad sizzling outfit, where she's doing fireball attacks. Shantae as a series is always kind of interesting because it is really just a classic old school platformer that has a unique art style. To have Shantae be a object of desire and show more skin than you normally would expect, but it never really crosses the line, and so it really is just like a prepubescent teens type of daydream. As far as what's shown, it's not really showing more than what a 2-piece bikini would show in most of the outfits. And weirdly, even though it does kind of sell itself on sexualizing Shantae, the actual game itself doesn't, and the gameplay kind of contradicts that completely. I believe this is the second game in the series, so the very first one may still not be ported. Yeah. And there has been an evolution certainly on the Shantae games too, in that the graphics look way better for the newest game, and it is definitely not just limited to be played on something like a Game Boy Advance or Game Boy 2DS. Moving on, Hell Is Us Diving into Dungeons gameplay is available. This is apparently an RPG. I think this is the first I've heard of this game though. Let's jump just into the minute of this trailer and see if it will actually play. So, it looks to me like it is another style of Dark Souls, Demon Souls type game, but there's more puzzle solving I can see that you also have to do, and the inventory plays more like you're going to do things faster, and you're not just going to have to go back to bonfires to manipulate your inventory. So I might very well be wrong calling it a Dark Souls Demon Souls game, as much as this may just be an attempt at making a more modern dungeon crawling game. Which, in fairness, if they could modernize dungeon crawlers, then a lot of games would be more appealing to me. Yeah, they're talking a lot about solving puzzles. That they are going out of their way to not really show combat, but obviously there will be some combat that happens here. Yeah. And these are different types of monsters to fight. There's a whole sci-fi aspect to this and just surreal reality to this. They're saying puzzles are a key part, but there will also be fights. They just said they're not making a game that's brutally hard. Interesting. So I have to really retract the whole Dark Souls Demon Souls. It's just the visuals there made me jump to that assumption. And interesting. Well, that definitely intrigues me more than now knowing it isn't trying to be a Dark Souls, Demon Souls type of game. And looking at these screenshots, it's easier to tell it's not one of those games. So yeah, this might be something I might want to actually play. Although, don't know if I'd get around to it very fast. Moving on, Gamatsu says Nintendo's Direct Partner Showcase is set for July 31st, so tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Pacific Time, kind of early in the morning. Famitsu's review scores for issue 1909, Robocop Rogue City, Unfinished Business, and more have been scored. Day of the Shell, I don't recognize that, was given a very low 28 out of 40. Robocop Rogue City Unfinished Business was given 30 out of 40, so average. And The Wizard of Bug for Switch, another game I don't recognize, was given 31 out of 40. So, a big name would be the Robocop game, but even that is not getting received particularly well, and I'm not super surprised either. R-Type Delta HD Boosted launches November 20th in Japan. I'd assume this is a remaster re-release of an R-Type game. Will this support English? It says yes, it will. So we can get it at some point on Steam. A Bishoujo card battle game called RPG Destiny Code, no, just called Destiny Code, has been announced for PC. So what is Bishoujo? If I recall correctly, it is fighting girls. That would be my assumption here, as far as an anime style. Fighting heroine girls, compared to, there's another word that would be fighting boys, more like Power Rangers. Although I might be wrong about that, and Bishoujo may just be fighting in general. Interesting. So that could have a different twist on it, certainly, as far as why people might be interested in playing the card game. But it would have to get very popular, I think, very soon, very fast, for people to stick with it. And they're saying it's a card game, but look at every single screenshot here, it's showing you text and visual novels, and it's showing a very different type of gameplay screen than what I would expect. It's really an RPG game that is activated by cards, where I was thinking collectible card game, trading card games with players versus players. So while that may have an audience, that was not the audience I was thinking it about. Moving on, Sumiko Garashi Tsukuro. I'm gonna stop trying to pronounce these words at this point. That is too much. This game here has been announced for Switch. This is the entirety of the name. Yeah, it looks like it's probably a cutesy, kid-friendly game, if I was to guess. But there's always a possibility it is actually not kid-friendly. Drag and Drive overview trailer global jam demo set for August 9th and to the 10th. The trailer, I assume, is out now. I would be surprised if this does particularly well, and I don't see how you can make it do particularly well. Nintendo could try and promote the heck out of it and still probably wouldn't sell that many more copies. It definitely feels like a game that should probably be given away free to all Switch 2 owners as just a thank you gift. Moving on, Hello Kitty Island Adventure for PS5 launches August 5th. I believe it is already out on PC, if not other platformers. Yeah. And we can see it is rated very positively. Yeah. Let's see how very positively. Last 30 days, 94%. Overall, 93%. Does not have any in-app purchases at all. So, seems like it is a pretty good game to potentially grab if you're a Hello Kitty fan, and or if you have a young kid. This looks like a game that might be very appropriate for a young kid. Although, there is still very much a question that if you have a kindergartner, there's kind of not a good reason to give them a Steam Deck and have them be able to play only 5 or 6 games that would be age appropriate. It's much closer to if you have a 5th grader or 6th grader that you can start to say that they are mature enough to start playing games that might be rated T for teen. And there aren't even that many T for teen games on Steam, let's just be honest. The vast majority of games, if rated, are M for mature, and the ones that aren't rated are probably M for mature or worse. Slime Rancher 2 launches September 23rd. I thought Slime Rancher 2 was already out. I still haven't gotten around to playing Slime Rancher 1. And I don't think I ever bought the DLC for Slime Rancher 1, which may be why I haven't played Slime Rancher 1. But yeah, you probably will see some YouTubers playing Slime Rancher 2 just because it was fairly popular. The first game was fairly popular on YouTube. Yeah. It isn't out, but it's been in early access. That's the deal. So the early access reviews for it are very good, but they are going to come out and say they are done with it one way or the other. Let's see, Neptunia Game Maker R Evolution for PC launches August 26th. It's an action RPG currently available for consoles. It may very well be yet another remake, reboot of a previous Neptunia game, or it might be some new Neptunia game. The Neptunia series still alive and thriving, whereas the Senran Kagura series, which was often releasing on the same schedule as the Neptunia games, has disappeared due to censorship. It's been a long time since any Senran Kagura game has been released. In fairness, the Senran Kagura games also maybe didn't sell well enough. Break Arts 3 has been delayed to an unannounced date, which basically is no news at that point. Hotel Barcelona launches September 26th. Physical editions distributed by Nighthawk Interactive. So this is the game that was being made by the Suda51 and Swery, two avant-garde, highly artistic people, if not perhaps slightly autistic people. I make a joke there, which I believe Suda51 had a small hand in a game, that one of Grasshopper's first game, called Michigan Report from Hell, that is, I think, very hard to even find and play, and it's barely a game. And it got me thinking, as he denied a lot of involvement around that game in an interview, that it probably doesn't benefit creativity much to have very creative people who have ideas of their own work together, and that it might very well be better to pair a highly artistic person with somebody who is known for just being good at making gameplay mechanics or fleshing out the gameplay programming and the experience there, because usually that's a whole team of people that you have to have. You have one artistic vision person that is throwing out ideas, and then you have dozens of people trying to implement those ideas, and they are artistic in their own way, but they're definitely being focused to make the vision of the artist a finalized product. But it just feels kind of crazy to put two artists in the room and say make a painting together. I don't want to see Michelangelo and, let's say, Van Gogh somehow magically in the same room and tell them to collaborate to make a painting. I would much rather see Van Gogh make a new painting and Michelangelo make a new painting, and maybe you'd have the same subject and you would contrast those subjects, and that might be interesting. But having them collaborate to make something that's going to be in the mushy middle doesn't make any sense at all. At least it doesn't in my mind. That being said, I don't have a clue what Hotel Barcelona is about yet. But yeah, I think it is probably going to be two people's weirdness is combined. And yeah, when it's from the creators of Deadly Premonition, a game that is notorious for having bad gameplay mechanics, and No More Heroes, a game that doesn't really have great gameplay mechanics either, then you pretty much have to assume that this game is still not going to have very good gameplay mechanics. And even in the screenshots you can see that there's just like wide variety in what is being shown on the screenshots, and just a ton of weirdness in this trailer. Yeah. And yeah, there is a certain point where weirdness for weirdness sake just goes too far. And if Hotel Barcelona manages to not go too far, I'll be fairly surprised. Part of the reason why we think even Super Mario Brothers was made is at the time, hallucinogenic mushrooms were legal in Japan, and so there is a real assumption that people making Super Mario Brothers were taking mushrooms for inspiration. But this is a much more modern game, so if they are still taking mushrooms, they may have had their lifetime supply at this point. As far as they're too far off from reality. Moving on, Disguise 7 complete for Switch 2 launches October 10th in the West. It's already 10:30 at night where I live, so yeah. I started a little late, about an hour late, and today is a longer day with the news. Also rambled too much at the beginning. A game called I Hate This Place has gameplay trailer, which, yeah. Horns on the shirt there. Is that a team name, I wonder? Or is it a Hooters equivalent? Yeah. They're claiming comic book art style, which I can see some of that. And isometric view survival horror, which I can see some of that. Okay. PlayStation Plus's monthly games lineup for August announced. DayZ, Liza P, and My Heroes 1's Justice 2. That's what that one is. Okay. Chronos, The New Dawn has 35 minutes of gameplay, which I don't really want to sit through all of that, but let's jump in the middle and see if we can see a little bit of gameplay. So it's a charge-up gun being shot. You have some kind of health indicator in the lower left corner. You pick up energy for your gun, and then a certain number of bullets being shown on the right. So yeah, this feels like this is a grindy Dead Space style game. We've got some very monstrous monsters. Looks like they might have some kind of transformable ability in that they transform into a new phase if you don't kill them fast enough. There's some kind of anomaly. There's some kind of collectibles. Yeah. Apparently you just found an upgrade. This might be a world where there are anomalies. They're calling them time oddities. So it might be a little bit Metroidvania-ish. Interesting. Let's jump a little bit further. Now we're in the building. So yeah, it feels to me like this is a Dead Space if you were still on Earth and there was a time element to it. It has the stomp of Dead Space, it has red barrels, which actually Dead Space didn't really have a lot of red barrels. It was maybe a sequence or two. In fact, a lot of this design seems approaching copyright infringement for Dead Space. But it probably makes more sense to make a game that plays a lot like Dead Space but is in a different world than try and tell a continuing story for Dead Space. That first story of Dead Space 1 stands alone very nicely, and even trying to integrate it into Dead Space 2, I think, hurt retroactively the story of Dead Space 1. But yeah, I definitely see Dead Space all over that game. Next story from Gamatsu, Digimon Story Time Stranger Digimon Special Moves Volume 2 trailer. It is available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. This is still coming out October 2nd. Could be a big deal, but I suspect probably won't be a big deal. Although it might just be the case that there isn't that much competition also, so it might sell better than I'm thinking. A 4-player co-op hack and slash action game called Godbreakers has been announced for the PS5 and PC. Some interesting helmets these guys are wearing. Let's just check it out on Steam. It could be something, certainly. Atari is going to acquire the Thunderful Group, which we had already talked about, so we don't need to mention again. Asterix and Obelix Mission Babylon announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC throughout October 30th. This would be the first new Asterix and Obelix game, I assume it's a new game, in a very long time. But also, it's worth pointing out that the remakes and re-releases of old Asterix and Obelix games have not been received particularly well. Asterix and Obelix, I believe, is perhaps only really popular in whatever country it's from, whether that's Sweden or Poland or whatever, and has less recognizability alone, let alone popularity, in the United States. Yeah, I've always wanted to see if there was some way I could like Asterix and Obelix, but I haven't been able to find a way to actually find any part of it that I could like. A 2.5D pixel art fantasy RPG, Spark Ignites, has been announced. I guess the game is called Spark Ignites. Okay. We'll look at the screenshots on Steam. Yeah, it might be something. The Super NES Nintendo Switch Online has added Mario Paint, supporting that mouse functionality. Is there any picture here that would show the mouse actually being used? It's a whole 3-minute video here just highlighting the things you can do in Mario Kart. Yeah. So the way they're depicting it is that the mouse controls it says you can use either the left or right Joy-Con as a mouse on the Switch 2, and then you have to plug in the way it's being depicted in a yeah, it looks like they want you to dock it to plug in a mouse, but I imagine you probably could use a USB-A connector to USB-C adapter and then plug in a wired mouse directly into the bottom of the Switch. But I guess the idea there is that if you were holding something in a non-docked form, though, you also wouldn't have a table to put a mouse on anyways. But then that really makes a assumption that it makes a real assumption that people's Nintendo docks are on a desk where you would have room for a mouse and a mouse pad, and that's not really how it would be. More than likely a Switch 1 dock is going to be on some like TV console, and here you can see the original mouse, which they aren't selling a recreation of the original Super NES mouse. Moving on, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance shipments and digital sales have topped 1 million. For the fact that Shin Megami Tensei 5 advertised a new monster every day for what felt like a year, and then it re-released itself in a better form as Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, it is taking forever for it to even get to 1 million. It's really not a successful launch. Combined, the original Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Vengeance have sold 2.11 million units, they're saying. Yeah. It's not a series that is in any way as successful and as popular as the spin-off series of the Persona games, which, if anything, I think probably should just give up completely on the Shin Megami Tensei series in favor of focusing and speeding up future Persona games. Yeah. It is often the case in TV shows, for instance, that spin-off shows go on to be more successful or as successful as the originals, although it's often the case spin-off shows also fail miserably too. But yeah, I don't think Shin Megami Tensei in particular is going to have any real success, and we don't have any Gaming on Linux articles open where I'm looking for them, which makes me wonder if the Gaming on Linux articles are somewhere else. But I don't see them at all, so it may very well be that they just did not open up. So I think what we're going to end up doing is skipping Gaming on Linux and GameDeveloper.com for a moment, and then doing all new games on Steam next. But before I do that, it is time for me to take a short bathroom break, so I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Apparently there's a Humble bundle that is going on where you can get Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered for like $35, but it is also worth pointing out that the latest patch for Oblivion Scrolls Remastered seemingly didn't patch or fix anything at all, according to DF Retro, so it's as buggy as it has been, the remaster has been, and it's not just a case of it having the same bugs that the original game had. It has a whole new set of bugs, which almost is to be expected considering they're running a completely different game engine on top of the original engine to make the graphics look better. Alright, so we're going to go through all the new games on Steam, and if we run into Gaming on Linux articles, great. If we run into Game Developer articles, great. If we don't, then I assume we'll have to manually open those at the end. I'm going to say no to anything that's just like bum revenge, because that just seems mean-spirited, and as there is talk of attempting to criminalize homelessness in the United States at the moment, that seems like really poor timing too. So yeah, and the rest of these games I'll just close without even saying any comment on it. Tower networking, interesting idea for a game. It probably won't go very far. We'll give this Genki Breaker a chance. Give that a chance. I think girlfriend.exe.exe is going to be a no. Velocity 1 is going to be a no. I think I'm going to be fairly cruel today, which is a good thing. More of these games I can remove from even making YouTube shorts, the better. But yeah, speaking of YouTube shorts and scheduling things, I had a burst there where I scheduled things for a while, and as soon as I did start scheduling things, I am actually getting some views on my scheduled pre-recorded footage. But either I would need to continue scheduling things just to have things scheduled, which is true, but also I think I'd need to schedule more things coming out to actually get more views, because I'm still very much nowhere close to having the 4,000 watch hours I would really want to potentially be considered to be put into the YouTube Partner Program. And the hope was that I would have been into that point as soon as possible this year. But yeah, I don't know if there's a lot of reason to have any faith that that is going to happen. It almost certainly isn't going to happen. The only thing that could happen is that one of my pre-recorded series just really catches on, and it might be the Sudoku series. There is certainly something about, once I get into the cracking the cryptic videos, that might get a lot of search engine optimization unintentionally from the YouTube algorithm, because when I do watch a cracking the cryptic video, the next 10 suggestions when I click the next button are all other cracking the cryptic videos, which is way too many suggestions from the effort to make. If I skip 3 from the same channel, it should not be suggesting videos from the same channel at that point. It should move on to another thing, and it shouldn't move on to a different Sudoku video from a different content creator either. It should assume that if I've just watched the Sudoku thing, I'm not interested in it. So this game that was censored is called Nightclub Simulator, and it is tagged with having nudity, and I have a tendency to believe that might be the case. I think we may have seen this before, and it definitely feels like it could just be a low effort asset flip game. They're calling it a nightclub, but from the looks of it, it feels more like a strip club or a sex club in the half of the screenshots. Yeah, I can't imagine that there's an actual game in that experience, though, that there is to have and there is to play. Let's see. Some of the older games that I want to cover, like Manhunt, at this point may be not YouTube family friendly enough to play. So some of the games that are basically on my short list, I may have to skip, even if I don't want to. Yeah. But yeah, I guess there is a crazy possible future where cracking the cryptic videos that I did are so popular for some reason. Maybe I would have to assume it's because people like to be able to solve the puzzles before the streamer solves them, which, if that's the case, you will have plenty of time to do that in my cracking the cryptic videos. But yeah, in some crazy universe where I've realized I'm not good enough to actually make those kinds of videos, I might end up buying more of the Cracking the Cryptic DLC and doing more of those puzzles. Which, that would be crazy, and I think there would be a need to really decide how I was going to do that. That might become a very different type of series that happens only once a week or so, where I am just doing the puzzles, one puzzle per week. And that might actually save me time overall, but it probably wouldn't, because my mind slows down to at least half speed when I have to talk and be a video game commentator while playing a difficult puzzle game. Even the electronic puzzle game that I'm playing now, I'm feeling some of that, where it is kind of hard to talk and play at the same time. Yeah, I'm having trouble talking and sorting through these pages at the same time. I think my brain is just in need of a rest. It's probably a good example where I should recognize those times and do a Lego set instead. Something that's a little bit more of a relaxing, slow-paced, dumbed-down experience. Yeah. There's another alternate possible future, I guess is what you would call it, where I'm just so desperate for being in the YouTube Partner Program to claim any income at all that I do start doing the cracking the cryptic puzzles every single day. Just like one puzzle a day. And that'd probably be the most I'd ever be willing to do, but yeah. if one puzzle takes me 6 to 9 hours to solve, though, which some of those are like that, that's way too much time. I mean, there is a level of real need where I would just be better if I was even making just like $2,000 a year minimum from YouTube, as that would have some reason to file taxes. Of course, that's not going to pay for anything. If you were making $2,000 a year, it's basically 200 bucks a month, less than 200 bucks a month. Although in fairness, if I could get an extra 200 bucks a month or 150 a month, that would be nice. Nobody would turn that down. Do we have anything else to talk about? Really don't know. This is a VR game. I think it's worth showing off, though. Sometimes I feel like I hold myself to too high of a standard. I probably do, but also, whatever standard I hold myself to does not reflect actual success. But I do have this feeling like I should always be doing something more. I should be always coming out with some new idea. And yeah, never really feel like that's probably AI generated. Never really feel like there's a great deserving time to just relax and take a break. And I'm probably not alone in that, and that people need to remind themselves that you deserve rest, you need rest, you should take a break. Although inherently I'm also just always tired, so I actually need rest way more than most. I never get a good quality rest. Like, only this morning did I wake up and think, oh, my rib is only half in pain, so whatever was going on that was poking me in the rib, my mattress seems to finally have started to either soften up, or more likely it's not the mattress at all, and it is just that I have had this horrible lingering cough that I thought I was over with, but even now I suspect might come back. And so I suspect I was just coughing without actually waking up a lot in the middle of the night. Yeah. As my suspicion as to why I was waking up with pain in my rib. We'll look at the flawless cleanup here for a brief second, just to see if there's anything new that interests me. And then, let's see. Here we have the other Sniper Elite articles that were opened in a weird place. Well, not articles, but links on Steam. And then that means the Gaming on Linux news either didn't open up at all, or it is hidden somewhere. And as far as I can tell, seems to me like it is just hidden. This is page 2. I don't know why they'd be on page 2 in the first place. Okay. Let's draw a box and open all the articles on page 1, Gaming on Linux, which I think a lot of these we may have already talked about. I failed to run my macros to close a bunch of tabs before today happened too, so things ran slower today than they likely should have. I'm just waiting for all of the tabs to open, or one of the tabs to become stable and not jump focus around. Should be done pretty soon here. Yeah. Of course, the thing here is that any article opening up in Gaming on Linux has my injected JavaScript code that then automatically checks for any link to Steam and opens up that also. So me opening about 10 pages potentially opens 20 or more pages. Right. Let's see if we can find where this starts. So yeah, we'll assume it starts here. Valve's revealed its new store menu and enhanced search, now in beta. Gaming on Linux kind of does a bad element here and shows you only one screenshot. I've seen other screenshots that show more, and so it's perhaps not as informative as it should be. Yeah. Just go ahead and close that. I'm jumping around, or it's jumping me around. Super Meat Boy 3D looks fast, tough, and enraging in a whole new gameplay trailer. 20 years later, the D&D classics Demon Stone and Dragon Shard are getting upgraded Steam releases. Theme Hospital Game Engine Core 6 TH 0.69 released. You can now hear patients vomiting. Here's Super Meat Boy 3D. Here's the Dungeons and Dragons game. Hips and Noses is a cafe management sim with magical twists and great looking mechanics. Look Mom No Computer is a musical twin stick shooter action RPG. OpenLink Hub is an open source interface for ICU Link Hub and various Corsair devices. These are older articles. We talked about them in the previous stream. Crazy Hyperdimension Chronicles combines the ideas of Undertale and Dungeon Master. Mecha fans should keep an eye on Ironwing Valorant Record of Asteria. Stardock Entertainment reveals Elemental Reforged, bringing together multiple games. Interesting. Brings together the 4X series Elemental that was split into 3 games across Elemental War of Magic, Fallen Enchantress, and Sorcerer King. Stardock said the original plan conceived back in 2008 was limited by the technology of the time, and so this brings a modernized 64-bit game engine to deliver the original vision. Interesting. So yeah, splitting 3 games apart because of technical reasons and then merging them together into one game is something I haven't really seen done before. One would assume that these games may have been built on very compatible, if not the exact same engines. But what I'm seeing here is not particularly visually impressive. So it just feels like what might have been 3 games with more focus on specific gameplay elements have now been merged into one game that is going to be far too varied in its focus. Cattle Country, the Western-styled Stardew, gets expanded mining and new features, according to Gaming on Linux. Team Fortress 2 mod Open Fortress is getting closer to a Steam release. Soul Game release Flash Classics in Sword and Souls Legacy Collection. Interesting. Soul Game Studio releases Flash Classics. But yeah, there's a good question in my mind as far as how do you re-release a Flash game now that people aren't going to install Flash? Or how do you re-release a JavaScript game now that people are less likely to install Java? Not JavaScript, but Java is what I meant to say. Because I don't think there's just an easy way to run Macromedia Flash inside of an engine, whether it's Unreal, Unity, Godot, or some other engine. I don't think there's an easy way to run some kind of Java emulator inside those engines either. Proton Experimental gets fixes for Rockstar Launcher, Call of Duty World War II, Mortal Kombat 11. Okay. Proton continuing to improve. Terminator 2D No Fate moves to an October release. Seriously cool combat game Fumes has entered early access. The cerebral psychological horror Split from the dev of Buckshot Roulette is now out. Interesting. Sony sues Tencent over Light of Motoram, calling it a slavish clone of Horizon Zero Dawn. Atari is going to acquire 82% of Thunderful Group AB as Thunderful announces their restructuring. Proton 10.0-2 beta brings even more gaming improvements to Linux, SteamOS, and Steam Deck. Let's see if we can get into any details. Now, several new games are now playable. And then they fixed several regressions that would have been things that broke with the last update or the last beta. Of course, most of these fixes are not going to be super interesting unless you're really wanting to play that one game. Fallout 3 Game of the Year, not playing music certainly would make it a bummer to not play music in that case. And it's questionable why they have to make so many specific fixes for specific games. This green line at the bottom of the video in certain areas seems to be a problem that keeps on showing up for Proton. Yeah. If anything, these updates to Proton really highlight how many little patches are made for specific games, either via DirectX or NVIDIA drivers, to make sure. So, yeah. Several new games being listed here as being fixed. Several games being improved in its video playback. Agony unrated. Yeah, if there was no YouTube family friendliness problem, I would probably want to play Agony unrated just in preparation of then playing Hellraiser Revival when it comes out. Unfortunately, there is YouTube family friendliness problems, so I can't really play any of those. Same would be true with Galgun 2. I think it would be tough to play that game. On that aspect, it is worth pointing out that they have removed the specific restriction of harsh language in the first 7 seconds of a video. They are saying that their advertisers are now more comfortable with cussing in the first 7 seconds at the same level as cussing might happen anywhere else. I would wonder if really what they did there is they just canceled the program that was looking at the first 7 seconds, and now in general they're just looking at the entirety of the video. Inherently, there are certain words you still can't say or you'll get demonetized, and those words really haven't changed, and the amount and the tone of how you would cuss throughout your video may get your video demonetized anyways. But no longer is there this ridiculous dance where you have people try to be family friendly in the first 7 seconds, and then a minute in they start cussing up a storm, and as such the rest of the video is still not really within the bounds of what they want to make it advertiser friendly. Okay, well, I think that is all the Gaming on Linux articles. There was actually very few of them that were new, which is fine. Just kind of a slow week. So I think we've got all the Gematsu articles. I'm going to kind of assume we did. And I'm pretty sure we got all the Video Games Chronicles articles. So now I'm trying to scroll around through my tabs to get to the game developer articles, which I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually only one game developer article, maybe none. Here we are, gamedeveloper.com's page. We have one that seems to be new. And then this might be new. And then this might be new. And that looks new. And that looks new. And that looks new. And then, yeah, we'll assume the rest of that is old. So Microsoft details how the UK Online Safety Act will impact Xbox players. Social features will be restricted by age verification starting in early 2026. Yep. I will just leave it at that. UK citizens should probably try and put more influence on their politicians if they have a problem with the age verification aspect. The IGDA calls waves of adult game delistings a form of creative suppression. This issue is not just about adult content, it's about developers' rights. Well, I hate that they might start to make a states' rights argument here, that developers should have rights more than individuals should have rights, but if it prevents censorship, I am not going to complain too much about it. But yeah, the phrase developer rights just sticks in my teeth as a nasty phrase that's designed to imply a lot or divide a lot. Where the right phrase, if it was creators' rights, would make a lot more sense, but they don't want to say creators' rights because they don't want to give rights to creators who are being potentially paid by developers and companies. They want to give corporations rights. They don't want to give individuals rights. And a creator implies an individual, where a developer, in my mind, implies an employee for a corporation. Suppose read this article if you're so inclined, from GameDeveloper.com. Atari investing $5.1 million into Thunderful as the company undergoes restructuring. This might very well also just be Atari spending money to prop up Thunderful. Quote, they are not losing money, they're gaining less, end quote. A Heart Full of Games accuses owner Outright Games of mismanagement. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants Unleashed developer claims it has consistently delivered commercially successful projects on time and met performance goals. This is an accusation over the decision to shutter the studio and make all 28 employees redundant. Which, yeah, I don't know if this is a prelude to a lawsuit, and I don't know if anything being claimed here actually would affect the outcome of a lawsuit in the first place. But yeah, I would generally lean to believe that many of the video game companies that have laid off people or shuttered completely are not losing money per se. They were just making less than they wanted to. Although, what are they switching over to make more money? It would be the next question. Although I don't know if publishers or game development companies even really think it that well through. I think they often just say, if we're not making a certain percentage of profit, our shares will go down, so let's just lay off people so the shares keep going up for one more month. And then if we shutter the whole company at the peak of the share prices, then that might be as far as they really are interested in it having to go. EA's CEO claims that EA Sports will become the most valuable sports business in the world. Is it not already? I mean, maybe he's making an argument that other sports businesses such as the NFL, probably not the NBA, and probably not Major League Baseball, or maybe the soccer clubs, FIFA, maybe those are the types of businesses he's comparing it to. But I would severely question whether you could ever make that claim or comparison, because the idea that more money would be made by people playing EA Sports than people going to actual real FIFA soccer games seems completely unbelievable. And this definitely feels like this might be a statement that is being said out of spite because they lost the FIFA license. And on the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if the Olympics is the most valuable sports business in the world. Although, I guess it would depend on how you define value there. And then we have Crafton says Subnautica 2 legal fight shows the strength of its milestone progress. In an earnings call, investors question why Crafton's myriad of investments are being well managed. It's interesting for them to say, well, we're doing so well, we're being sued. But that is kind of the nonsense double speak that often happens in the corporate world, as far as people just being so up their own butt.